my sweet friends. How are you all doing? I'm August, this is Cozy Rosy Reads, and this is chatting about the 16 books that I read in the month of July. I can't believe it. I honestly can't believe I read 16 whole books in the month of July. That is at a pace that has been unheard of this year. That's definitely the most amount of books that I've read in a month so far in 2022, and I'm so happy about it. I feel so good about it, and let's chat about them. First off, we are actually filming in my kitchen today because we recently had to install an AC unit in the apartment, and it's loud, and it makes the street traffic super loud, and everything, it just feels chaotic. So, oh, and now my fridge just kicked on. So, everywhere I go in the apartment, there's just some sort of really overstimulating noise. Hopefully this is the most conducive to be able to help my brain space. And hopefully the slight hum of the refrigerator can lull you into a meditative state while I chat about these books. So I hope y'all are doing really well. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to try to go kind of quickly-ish in regards to these books because there are so many of them, and so many of the physical books that I read this month have dedicated reading vlogs, so I'll be sure to link all of those down below. But I did end up listening to quite a few audiobooks this month, which I have not talked about. So I hope you can get cozy. I hope you can hang out with me, hang out in this cutie little kitchen that I rarely ever film in, hop into some books. Cheers. So the first book that I finished in July was an audiobook called Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. This is a beautifully structured book. It is translated as well, and I should say too, some of these books, July feels like a fever dream a little bit. Some of the books that I listened to or read, I don't remember a whole lot of, and I decided not to make a whole lot of notes about them. I just want to chat about them as I remember, so I'm not going to remember character names if I don't remember them. We're just going to be a little vague, and I'll just let you know my thoughts on the reading experience, so I hope that's okay. It's not going to be super plot heavy descriptions in this one. I listened to this as an audiobook. It is translated. I don't know who the English translation is by, but the way this book is structured is super interesting. It almost feels like a series of memoir essays or personal essays. It doesn't feel like fiction, which I found really, really well done. It's following this female protagonist, and each chapter is almost like a little vignette, and it categorizes in the chapter title, explains where she currently is. So it says in the supermarket, walking on the bridge, in the dining room, or in the restaurant, and that's how we start that vignette. And then as the kind of short vignette story goes, you get a very slow unraveling of understanding who this person is, what her past was like, where she currently is now, what age she's at. And every single vignette bounces throughout her life. It could be a story from her childhood or her going through her daily life with either prominent people in her life or just strangers she bumps into. And it's just so beautifully written. It was very lyrical and gorgeous and very quaint, almost like a very slow, cozy read, but just very, very beautifully written. And I don't necessarily think that the writing style was conducive for me for an audiobook. I really feel like if I had a physical version of this book, I would have been annotating. It would have had maybe a little bit more of an emotional impact on me personally. But because it was an audiobook, I don't necessarily feel like I was retaining a whole lot of information or emotion. So for that reason, this book was only just like a 3-star for me. And since finishing it, I honestly have not thought about this book once. So it did not have an impact on me. It didn't shift the way my brain was thinking or working. It didn't make me question anything. So it was beautifully written, but I didn't get a whole lot of value out of it. So aesthetics, 100%. Emotional impact was not there for me, but overall it was a really enjoyable read, and I think if you can get your hands on a physical copy and annotate it and just be swept away by just the beauty of ordinary daily life, this is definitely something that you could be interested in. So that's the first one. The next book that I finished in July was The Tooth Fairy by Graham Joyce. This is my second Graham Joyce book that I've read, and this one was a slow burn. This is definitely a slow burn horror novel, but not super on the nose horror. This follows a young boy named Sam, and it starts when he's maybe around 10, 12 years old. Him and his best friends are just really reckless young teenagers. It takes place in the 1960s in England, and he loses a tooth one day. His friends convince him not to tell his parents that he lost a tooth, but he put his tooth under the pillow anyway, just to see if the Tooth Fairy would actually show up. And what he gets instead of this, you know, beautiful, lustrous Tooth Fairy is actually this terrifying creature that appears very androgynous, that is threatening Sam, that is saying like, you shouldn't be able to see me, why can you see me? This Tooth Fairy is interacting with Sam, and then this book catalogs Sam's life as he's going through a lot of hormones, a lot of body discovery, adolescence, and the Tooth Fairy just kind of ends up following him and changing shape and becoming somebody that Sam desires. And it's very graphic. This is a very, very sexually graphic book about adolescence, coming of age from a boy's perspective. So it's very like, for me as a reader, like it just felt really like dirty and gross and just a lot of sex, and a lot of thoughts about sex, and a lot of pining for women and discovering bodies and hormones and stuff. But what I did really love about it is how the Tooth Fairy was this continuous presence in his life, and how the Tooth Fairy impacted his life. Like the Tooth Fairy would just show up at all these random moments and kind of guide Sam through his life, through really big decision making, through some really terrifying things that happened to him. Winston just woke up. Hi! So I really wanted to keep reading it. There were definitely a few points in this novel that I was like, I don't want to read this anymore. I'm not vibing with it. This is not my cup of tea. This is a book I normally wouldn't read. And I just really wanted to know what was going to happen with this Tooth Fairy character. I had no idea where it was going because it was so horrifying and very unsettling. I'm so happy I ended up powering through and just reading it because I really enjoyed this Tooth Fairy character, and it ended up turning into this very magical realism, beautiful metaphor for growing up and letting go of youth and letting go of friendships and transformation and changes in all of our lives, but also in your body and memories and all of the, like, it just was this huge metaphor, and I found it really, really beautiful. After reading this, I definitely did think about this book for a good week or so after finishing it. But since then, I haven't really thought about it much. So I do believe this is like a 4-star for me. I really did enjoy it, and I'm happy that I gave it a chance instead of kind of DNFing it as I was reading it. Winston, what are you doing? Because it ended up being a really beautiful ending, and endings are really poignant and wonderful for me. So this one did a really good job with like tying things up and making things feel very emotive and surreal at the same time. So I really enjoyed this. I'm gonna give it 4 stars. That's the Tooth Fairy. Hello, dude. The next 2 books that I finished were both audiobooks. I was definitely trying to find as many like short audiobooks as I can because I'm understanding more and more my attention span is only made for like 3 or 4 hour long audiobooks. I can't commit to more. I lose attention, I don't pay attention, I need like shorter audiobooks for sure. So the first one I listened to was actually Comfort Me with Apples by Catherynne and Valente, who I think now I can actually say is one of my favorite authors, just because now this is the second book I've read by her. The first is Radiance, which is actually one of my favorite books of all time. I absolutely adored this novella. This is such an eerie, unsettling book once again, where it follows this main character. I do believe her name is like Sophie or something. She lives in this suburb, and this book bounces between almost like the, what's it called? Is it like the HOA or something, like homeowners association? Like all the rules of this suburb and what you can and can't do in this place. And then it bounces to her life, like waking up. She has a husband who's only referred to as the husband. She has all of these friends. All their names are different animals. So there's Mrs. Lion, Mrs. Crane, like all of these very interesting characters, and they all meet for lunch and you get to know them. It's just super odd, but I loved it so much. It's exactly the type of story and writing style that I absolutely enjoy. And again, this is a case of I wish I read this book physically, and I would not mind having a physical copy of it sometime in my life, because I would love to reread it and annotate the crap out of this book. I loved it so much, and where it was going and where it went was so cool. I just really liked it. It was like, again, very metaphoric, but it was a very strong metaphor. It was almost like blatantly like, this is what we're trying to do here, and we're not trying to hide it from you. Like, this is a metaphor for all these big things, and I don't want to give it away because it did feel like a little bit of a twist, but I really liked it. It made me think, it made me question, it made me feel things, and I really enjoyed it. So I gave this book 4 stars. I feel feel like if I read it physically and annotated it and could enjoy the beautiful writing style and the surrealism of this story. Again, it's not quite magical realism, definitely like almost speculative or surreal, and very abstract in this very odd, almost fantasy-like world. I would have maybe given it 5 stars because it was just beautiful, like, and enjoyable from start to finish. So that's come for me with apples. Next, I listened to Flowers from the Sea by Zin E Rocklyn. This is like a science fiction novella, and it was so beautifully written, my friends. Again, wish I read it physically so I could annotate it because the writing style is phenomenal. The writing style of this was so poetic and abstract and beautiful and terrifying. This follows like it's in a fantasy science fiction kind of world. I don't really even know how to describe it. You're not given a whole lot of context as to why this certain world feels so divisive and so at war with each other, but it follows this ship, sailing ship basically, and all the people who live aboard it. And one of the women on it, our main protagonist, gets pregnant by a guy on land who's like a prince or a leader or something like that, and she hates being pregnant. She does not want this baby. She's full of so much anger and rage and spite, and aboard this ship, no women have ever been able to have a healthy pregnancy. So a lot of content warnings, specifically around childbirth and motherhood and violence. So she's just this character who's just so angry, and you feel anger for her because her situation is just so messed up, and you can just feel, it's palpable how angry she is at her situation and how much she does not respect her community for making her go through with this pregnancy. There's so much beautiful poetic writing in here about the atmosphere, the way things smell and look. They try to grow food on board, everything dies on board basically, and it's just this very chaotic, unsettling ship. And then things happen, and it turns very like surreal, magical realism. It definitely feels like there's weight behind this story. There is a bigger motive that the author's trying to do, and I don't even know if I fully grasped it, or like the meaning, the metaphor, the intention behind this story. But I still felt something from it. Even if I couldn't fully understand the motive and the intention, I still felt something, and that was done so well. So for me, again, I really would love to get my hands on a physical copy. Would not mind rereading it with my eyeballs, just to have that experience over again. But I really enjoyed this one. In talking about it though, I definitely realized how much I enjoyed it, but once I finished the book, I didn't really think about it again. Yeah, one of those cases where you forget about it, but then in talking about it, it sparks the joy again. So I don't know, I guess this is like, in my brain, in hindsight, definitely more like a 3-star book because I didn't remember it, but in chatting, more like a 4-star. But I would not mind rereading it in a physical format and annotating a lot. The next book I read was Swimming Home by Deborah Levy. This is a shorty little book that follows a family that goes to a villa in the summertime, and a very interesting, mysterious woman named Kitty is already at the villa. She's not supposed to be there. They invite her to stay anyway, and then their whole lives just get completely destroyed by this woman. And it's a lot about family dynamics, about relationships between all these different characters, but it's written in such a distanced way where we're not fully able to see who these people are or how they think of themselves necessarily. I feel like a lot of this writing style was about how the characters either interact with each other, or more specifically, like how the other characters perceive the character we're talking about. You only find out information about these people through how they speak and what they do, and how other people are talking to them and interact with them. And I thought that was really interesting. It was a very interesting way to gather information and to form your own opinion about these characters, but you didn't really get to hear about them from themselves because it's all written in third person. And it almost feels like vignettes again. We're bouncing perspectives from the daughter, from the mom, from the father, from the mysterious woman, from the landlord, and everything just kind of turns into chaos. And it's still beautifully written though. I really enjoyed this writing style, just like a very languid summertime short story, it feels like. But again, it did not linger with me. I didn't really feel emotional reading this. I didn't feel impacted. It was really beautifully written, and I deeply enjoyed the reading experience. I flew through it, but I didn't necessarily feel any like oof, you know? And that's what I look for when I read books, is I want to feel emotional about it in some way. So this for me is just like a 3-star book. I will most likely be donating this copy because it didn't linger with me and I didn't really think twice about it once I finished it. All right, the next book I read was Cult Classic by Sloane Crosley. I bought this copy brand new. It is a signed edition because I was super stoked to read a Sloane Crosley novel. I've read all of her like published collection of memoir, personal essays, humor, nonfiction things. I really wanted to read one of her novels. So picked this up. I was super excited about it. Absolutely adore this cover art. And it follows our main character, Lola. She's in a relationship and she's engaged, but then she keeps running into all of her exes. She runs into all of them. She's starting to get really freaked out, like, why is this happening? And then bigger things are revealed as to why that's happening. This to me read like a very contemporary, fast-paced, page-turning beach read. It was super fun to read, I'm not going to lie. Like, I just had a lot of fun reading this. It felt so light and fluffy and fun, like a perfect beach read. But I gained nothing at all. I was actually very disappointed in the structure of this, in the pacing of it. The ending felt way too serious and sappy and emotional and just way too on the nose. Didn't have enough like surrealism and metaphoric feeling. It felt to me like I'll Eat When I'm Dead by Barbara Borland, where it's like it's written really well and very intelligently and very witty and smart and sharp, but the overall plot just like turns into this very like thriller-esque feeling instead of taking it more inward. It felt very in the physical world, things happening, rather than actually diving into understanding our characters on a psychological level and understanding their motive and their emotions. And I found that really disappointing because I feel like Sloane Crosley's like personal essays, you do get a deep dive into what she's thinking and why she does certain things, and almost her like very fragile state of just human sensitivity and being. And we didn't even get that from our main protagonist, Lola. It was talked about a little bit, like her ambivalence to relationships, her waywardness, her love of nostalgia with her past boyfriends, comparing all of her partners to each other, to hanging on to these like physical souvenirs of every relationship she's ever been in, not letting go of the past, blah blah blah. But like, it was not enough to pull this entire story from and to like feel any sort of emotional impact whatsoever. There were a few lines in here that were relatable, but it just felt so heteronormative and like just kind of icky. I did not understand. Like, it just felt so much like a really bad rom-com in a few parts where it's like, oh, all of this could have been avoided if you just communicated with your partner. Like, I really don't like that trope. Like, just communicate and talk about things and explore the past and your emotions. So it was just really disappointing, but I had a lot of fun reading it. I read it really quickly, and for me that was just a fun reading experience, but it did not linger with me at all. So this is like a 3-star book. I'm definitely gonna keep my copy because it is signed and I did have a fun time reading it, but it just did not do anything wow, out of the box crazy for me. Like, it wasn't a new inventive experience. So yeah, this is 3 stars. Okay, my friends, the next few books are all books that I read in my book bingo readathon with my new friend Ori, so I'll link that down below. So I'm gonna go pretty briefly because I talk about these books so in depth in that vlog. But the first book that I read to kick off that book bingo was the Tea Dragon Festival by Kay O'Neill. Freaking loved. I mean, 5 stars in my head. I loved it. It's so colorful, it's beautiful, it's fun, it's beautifully illustrated, it's emotional. It just made me feel all the feels. It's cozy and quaint and made me feel so happy inside. So I can't wait to read the 3rd book in this series. Yeah, I think that one's the Tea Dragon Tapestry. I absolutely love this. It's so enjoyable, it's so fun. It's an immediate mood booster reading this stuff, so It was phenomenal. Next, I reread the second book in the Girl from the Other Side series by Nagabe, which is translated by Adrienne Beck into English. I haven't even finished this series yet. I had to reread the second one because it had been a while since I read it, and I can't wait to read the third through the 11th book. I love this series so much. This is my favorite graphic novel series, my favorite manga series. So enjoyable. It's cozy. It's beautifully illustrated, like eerie and dark, but also cozy and quaint and just like a warm hug. I just can't express like how much I love this series. So rereading the second one was a really good idea because I did not remember how things ended and how tense things got. So this one definitely ends on a cliffhanger, and I really can't wait to read the third. So absolutely love this series. Cannot wait to continue it. Next, I hopped into Money Honey, a simple 7-step guide for getting your financial shit together by Rachel Richards, nonfiction book about very factual, helpful money habits and how to budget, how to save for things that you want in your future, how to actually implement these things in a realistic way that someone like me who's on the cusp of, I'm like right in between being a millennial and a Gen Zer, like right there, 1995 baby, not knowing what to do. I've read so many financial self-help books in my lifetime because I just really need help with that. I don't know what I'm doing and I want more guidance and I like learning. This actually helped me. I have actually been implementing all of the budgeting tools and the spreadsheets and the worksheets and all of the like almost data and analysis and organizing that this book has recommended for getting your financial shit together, and it has been life-changing for me. The rest of this book though is a lot about investing, student loans, getting out of debt, credit cards, stock, those kinds of things. And for those, I skipped a few chapters because it does tell you to in the beginning, like if there's something that doesn't apply to you, don't read it. So I did read a lot of information about, you know, things I'm interested in doing in the future that I definitely can't do right now, like building a portfolio, understanding credit a little bit more, a lot about like mortgages and houses, a lot of things that are not relevant to me. But just the beginning few chapters of this book, life-changing, my friends. I learned so much. I'm actually implementing it. It has actually helped. It has completely changed my viewpoint on money and investing in my own future and investing in myself instead of just spending money because I have it. It's really been a game changer for me, and I really recommend this book if you just want to understand a little bit more about finances. Like I said in that vlog though, I don't think this book is for everyone because this author does completely gloss over the disparity in pay, how women make less money than men, how women of color make even less money. It's a lot of blanket statements about like, if you don't know how to budget, then you are the problem and you're the one ruining your own money and you're not gonna get ahead. And I just think that's complete BS. Like that's not true. You can be working multiple jobs and still not have enough to budget or to put into a savings account. That's not necessarily anyone's fault. It is literally our society and living in a capitalist society. Also, this is written from a very millennial way, so there's a lot of like very cringy writing in here, like hashtags and a lot of references to current pop culture, referencing like the Kardashians and I don't know, things like that that just make it feel very of its time, which is fine, but it didn't feel like a timeless piece, and that's fine. I mean, you give and you take. It was entertaining to read though. It didn't feel boring. It actually kept me engaged as a reader and like speed reading. So it didn't feel like I was just slugging through this book and like getting really bored by the very dry writing. That was not the case. So I really enjoyed this. It really helped me. Definitely recommend, and I'm happy that that vlog introduced quite a few of you to this book. Some of you commented and said like thank you for this recommendation because I actually really did find it helpful, but I don't think it will necessarily be helpful for everyone. Everyone's different in their money journey. Next, I read this teeny tiny Dover thrift edition of Selected Poems by Emily Dickinson. It is so cute. I love this copy so much. It's just so dainty and beautiful, and I finally freaking read it. This is my first time reading Emily Dickinson, surprisingly, and I wasn't incredibly wowed. I really love poetry that's very surreal and abstract and I don't know what's going on. I really like that. I like when things just have a lot of colorful words and very out there and I don't know what's happening. And this one felt very nature focused, a lot about like seasons and gardens and being outside. And I thought it was really quaint and enjoyable. I actually think that if I had read this while listening to some beautiful classical music, it would have completely changed my reading experience. I think in just sitting down and reading it to silence, I did read it outside, so that was really lovely. But I think if I like made the experience a little bit more atmospheric and romantic for myself, I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. I don't know why, I just have that in my head of like, if I just read poetry while listening to music, it might be a little bit more cinematic. So overall, there were a few poems in here that I really enjoyed, but for the most part, I wasn't super wowed, but it was enjoyable. Did not think about it after I finished it though. Next, I finished listening to an audiobook, My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This was phenomenal. I really loved this writing style. I loved the plot. I loved the characters. I thought it was so incredibly well done, but I did not necessarily feel anything about the ending. Once the book wrapped up, I didn't think about it again. I'm very, very picky with my endings. It needs to have something profound and to make me feel and linger and think. This book wrapped itself up really well, so that's great if that's what you're into. For me, I like having a little bit more of like ambiguous endings or something that just makes me feel emotional, and I didn't necessarily feel super emotional with this book, but it did keep me super tense. This follows our main protagonist whose younger sister keeps killing her boyfriend. She'll start dating someone and then just kill him, and our protagonist has to go rescue her sister basically and bail her out of these situations and lie to people in her life and keep all these secrets for her sister. So it's definitely a very like protective role. It feels like a really good conversation about siblings, about family dynamics, about pretty privilege, just being in these situations that are really tense but taking them to the extreme. And I thought it was so well written. It was beautifully written, but also it kept and maintained that thriller aspect where you just really don't know where things are gonna go. I kept wanting to find mundane things to do around my apartment so I could keep listening to it. I found it really intriguing and enjoyable, and I just really, really liked it. So overall, this was a 4-star read for me. I definitely understand the hype of this book because I've heard so much about it and I really enjoyed it. And if I can find any other books, I don't know if there are any other books by this author, but I would definitely pick it up because I really enjoyed this reading experience. And the audiobook is phenomenal, my friends. The audiobook narrator is fantastic. So 4 stars. Next, I finished The Van Apfel Girls Are Gone by Felicity, McLean, and this was the last official book I read for that book bingo readathon. I really loved this. I loved the reading experience. I loved the writing style. I loved the characters. This follows a young girl named Tika growing up in the 1990s in Australia, and her best friends, the Van Apfel girls, live across the street. There are 3 of them, and one day they just go missing. It's all about the repercussions of going through a tragedy and a trauma at a young age and how that impacts the rest of your life going forward. It's just exploring this missing piece in your life and how to grapple with it, how obsessive these feelings can be. All Tika wants to do is know what happened to these girls because they just are missing. So it bounces between their childhood and then Tika nowadays, where she's kind of in her, I think maybe early 30s, and it's just so well written. It was definitely a wonderful summer read. I flew through it. I just wanted to keep reading it. And that's such a good feeling. You just want to pick up a book and turn the pages and know what's going to happen. It's not a stereotypical thriller in that sense, where if you're going into this thinking it's going to be a thriller or horror, you might not be interested because you are not necessarily a part of the missing person's case, because you're viewing the whole situation from this like third-party perspective. You're an outsider looking in. You're watching Tika not even witness these things happening, but just experience the loss. And I just really love that. I love books that do that, where we are distanced, but we're microscopically focusing on the aftershock, the shockwave that happens after a tragedy happens in a smaller town, especially in like the hot summer of Australia in the 90s. complete vibes. I really, really enjoyed this. I had so much fun reading it. Again though, the ending didn't wow me. I don't quite remember it anymore, so it didn't have that lingering impact on me. I enjoyed the reading experience a lot more than the ending. Once the ending happened, I was like, oh, okay, cool. The book is done. The actual experience of reading it, fantastic. I think that's a very common theme with the books that I've talked about so far, is like the reading experience was a lot of fun, but the emotional impact wasn't necessarily there. So I give this book 4 stars. Definitely a 4-star read for me. Next, I read Miss Ice Sandwich by Mieko Kawakami over on my Kindle, and this was such a treat. It was so beautiful. Again, very, very short, less than 100 pages, and this follows a young boy who is neurodivergent. He's in the 4th grade, and he becomes obsessed with this woman who works in the supermarket that he calls in his head Miss Ice Sandwich. And it's just about him dealing with relationships and the world with his family, his mom, his grandma, through the lens of this like neurodivergence. He is trying so hard to understand emotions and conversations with people, but he's having a hard time with it. And you can feel the like frustration that he's experiencing. He wants to be a part of things. He wants to have emotional connection, but he feels like he's doing it wrong, and he feels like he's too quiet and not as involved as he could be. So being in this character's head was amazing. We're only there for a snippet, less than 100 pages. We don't get a whole lot of a backstory with him either. We just get like where he's at right now, some of his thoughts and what he's going through. So I really enjoyed this book. Unfortunately though, it did not linger with me. The reading experience was fantastic, but I didn't think about it when it was done. But I had so much fun reading it. I flew through it. So for me, this is like a 3.5-star read, just because the impact wasn't there. And it was so quick that I flew through it, but didn't really take time to think about it afterwards, and it didn't impact me emotionally in that sense. So it's Miss Ice Sandwich. Okay, my friends, the last 3 books I'm going to chat about were in my most recent vlog. I read all 3 of them, and I'm going to go kind of quick, but I enjoyed these books so much, so much. The first is The Hole by Hiroko Oyamada, which is translated into English by David Boyd. This is a very quaint, quiet, unsettling book. Not a whole lot happens. It's a very like ordinary life, very rudimentary writing style, very linear storytelling, but also magical realism and very surreal. It follows this young woman, Asa. Her and her husband moved to the countryside. She no longer has a job. She's now a stay-at-home wife. She's bored out of her mind. And then she follows this very strange creature into this field, this like mythical looking creature, and she falls into a hole. And then after that, weird things are just happening. And it's that very quiet, unsettling, not a whole lot happens. Not a whole lot is described. I keep saying whole. But it's unsettling. It's eerie. It's like when you're in a dream and you know things are off and wrong, but you can't remember or understand why. These characters just don't feel like they have normal human behavior. The relationships feel really distant. We're not given a lot of information. You're just thrown right in. And it's a very short book, but wow, I really loved it. I thought it was super interesting. I love the writing style. For me, right now, this still feels like a 4-star read, but I am curious to see as the weeks go on, as the months go on, like what I feel about it. And if I have maybe more feelings about it than I think I do. But right now, 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed this book. Like, it feels like normcore. Like, not a whole lot happens at all. It's just ordinary life, escaping corporate Japan into the farmlands and being stranded out there and having nothing to do and getting super, super bored and hanging out at a 7-Eleven. Like, it's just super quaint and quiet, but also so beautiful and weird, and nothing's given to you, so you just gotta figure it out. I love that. So still a 4-star. I'm curious to see if it lingers with me and if I keep thinking about it though. So that's The Hole. And there's the refrigerator again. Next, I read I Could Be Your Neighbor, Isn't That Horrifying by Cavin, Bryce, Gonzalez. In that vlog, I kept saying, I could be your neighbor, isn't that terrifying? It's horrifying. I loved this. This was my only 5-star read of the month, and right now it's a 5-star, but I am curious to see in the weeks that come. Normally 5 stars are books I cannot stop thinking about, and I get warm, weird, fuzzy feelings when I think about it. I'll see if it continues to feel like a 5-star, but I finished this all in one night, I annotated so much. This felt so oddly poignant and like this author was looking into my brain, but also it's really sad and lonely, and there were a lot of things I couldn't relate to, but then there were also short stories in here that were magical realism and odd and bizarre, and I loved it. It was entertaining, it was valuable, it made me emotional, everything about it I really loved. So this is like a collection of almost like short stories, vignettes, very short, tiny little snippets of this man's life. And he lives in what he calls the Floridian hellscape. He definitely struggles with alcoholism and addiction too, so definitely some content warnings there. But overall, like the writing style, phenomenal. It's both beautiful and disgusting and horrifying and sad at the same time, which is exactly the style I like. It's weird, it's funny, it was relatable. I just really loved it. And there are so many other short, like almost indie published pieces that this author has come out with that I want to read all of them. I want to collect all of them. I want to have all of them. Really, really loved, truly loved. So that's my only 5-star read of the month. And then lastly, my friends, we are here already. The last book that I read in July was Red Lights by Georges Simenon and has been translated into English by Norman Denny. This book was written in the 1950s, and even though it's by a French author, it takes place in New York, in Manhattan. It's this couple, they're married, they go and pick up their kids from summer camp. But on the way up, the husband, Steve, just wants to keep stopping for drinks along the highway. So again, a lot of content warnings for this book. There's addiction, alcoholism, abuse, SA, domestic violence, hospitals, trauma, everything. Like, it got really, really dark as we went on in this novel. It takes place in the 1950s. There's definitely some outdated language, but I really enjoyed the reading experience of this. Again, I just didn't want to put it down. I really enjoyed the pacing, the writing style. I really enjoyed it. It's a very bland, linear storytelling. We're just thrown right in. We don't get a lot of backstory as to who these characters are, how they grew up, what's their motive, what's their trauma, what's their damage. We don't know anything. We're just thrown right in, and I really enjoyed that. A lot of chaos happens. Basically, our main character, Steve, runs into and befriends an escapee at a local prison. Shit happens, and it gets really dark, really fast. But I really enjoyed it. It didn't, again, linger with me. I don't think there's any emotional impact in here, but it was a really beautiful character study by the end of this, and relationship study between this straight married couple in the 1950s, and how our emotions and internalized emotions can be so deceptive and really throw us off course if we feel a certain way but don't communicate it. So I thought it was really interesting and really good. I had never heard of this book before picking it up. Same with the last 3 books. Just never hearing of them before picking them up is just such a treat and a delight, and it really warms my heart. So I really enjoyed this. I think it is more like a 3 or 4 star reading experience because I did have a lot of fun. I couldn't put it down. I flew through it, but we'll see if it lingers with me. Right now, it's definitely a 3.5 star probably. So here we have it, friends. These are some of the 16 books that I read in the month of July. Overall, such a fun reading month. Honestly, I read so much. I read so many different things. A lot of similar themes though in terms of how they made me feel. Not quite feeling emotional, not quite feeling fully satisfied by these books, but they all had really good promises and they kept me intrigued and actually reading. I also DNF'd quite a few books this month. Maybe one day I'll do a video of all the books I recently DNF'd, but the books I did end up going through with, I just had a lot of fun reading, and I loved having fun while reading and not feeling pushed to read certain things, just reading because I wanted to read them and enjoying them for what they were. Even if they didn't have a lingering, emotional, memorable impact on me. So some of these not incredibly memorable, but I had a really fun time. So that is that, my friends. If you made it to the end of this very long, chatty wrap up, first off, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for staying till the end. But yeah, let's do some emojis. We did this last month and it was so fun. Let's do emojis based on your favorite book of July. If you had a favorite book in the month of July, create some emojis around what that book was. It could be the cover, the title, the plot, like just do a string of emojis that kind of describe that book. I really loved doing that and seeing your responses. They were so creative. It was so cool to see. So yeah, definitely let's do that again. I think we're gonna do that for every wrap up, just your favorite book in emoji form. And feel free to tell us what it actually is as well, unless you want us to play a little guessing game. But thank you all so incredibly much for being here, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I can't wait to see you all again very soon for my next one. Stay cozy, my friends. Bye!